Hello, everyone, and welcome. We thank you for joining us for this Saltillo guest webinar. I'm Kim Gallant, the Training and Implementation Specialist for PRC Saltillo, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. We are thrilled to have Filla with us to talk about principles of co-teaching and how to apply these principles to therapy in the schools and clinic settings. Annie is a speech-language pathologist in an elementary school in the St. Louis, Missouri region, serving students in grades K through 6. She is an alumna of Truman State University and St. Louis University and holds graduate certification in assistive technology from Bowling Green State University. Annie has many years of experience working with children with complex communication needs in schools, private clinics, and in early intervention. She also serves in district leadership positions as data leader and internal coach, supporting SLPs and teachers in developing high-yield, research-based plans for intervention and expanding their co-teaching practices. If you have questions for Annie during the presentation today, please type them into the chat window found in your toolbar. She will address as many as time allows. To receive ASHA credit for your participation today, please download the ASHA form and instructions from the materials section of the toolbar. Remember to put today's date on your form, as we will use that to identify the correct course number when we receive your form. Also, to get credit for today's presentation and CEUs, you will need to be on the webinar for the entire time. Finally, a feedback survey will pop up at the end of the webinar. We would appreciate your input. About an hour after the webinar, you'll receive an email that contains the ASHA forms, handout, and certificate of attendance for those not using the ASHA CE registry. So, Filla, we appreciate you being here today to share your knowledge and expertise with the Saltillo community.
All right. Hi, everyone. Like Kim said, I'm here to present on co-teaching for AAC therapy and how it can be applied to whatever setting that you're in or whatever other professionals that you want to co-teach with. So we'll get started. My financial disclaimer, I'm receiving a speaker fee from PRC Saltillo, and I have no other relevant financial or non-financial relationships to disclose. Kim already told you a little bit about me. I did want to just say that the leadership positions that she was talking about are where I first learned about co-teaching and how it works. And through my work supporting teachers, I became really passionate about figuring out a way for SLPs to co-teach as well. And then one little tidbit about me is that my SLP claim to fame is that I once gave my dog the PLS 5. There he is. My goal for this session is for you to be able to come away with some really practical ideas on how to apply co-teaching in whatever setting you're in. So that's the main goal. There are the outcomes that you read when you registered for this session. All right, and then just 2 things to think about as we go through this are how can co-teaching principles be applied to speech-language pathologists, and what steps will ensure that you're able to implement this type of therapy in your setting. So we'll kind of be, just keep those questions in the back of your mind, and hopefully they'll get answered as we go through this. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so here's our agenda. First, we'll be going through the different principles and types of co-teaching and talking about how they can be used in therapy. And then the real bulk of the presentation will be spent on talking about collaborating with other professionals, who you can collaborate, what it might look like, calibrating or getting on the same page for having meaningful therapy, and then implementing the plan. And then we'll have a little time for wrap up and questions. Okay, just to give you an idea of what kind of population I'm applying this to, like Kim said, I work with grades K through 6, And most of my students have complex communication needs ranging from minimally verbal to verbal but unintelligible. There's a variety of diagnoses, including Down syndrome, autism, Dravet syndrome, intellectual disability, cerebral palsy. And most students are in the special education setting for most of the day. One student that I was working with participates in the general education setting for most of the day. Students are using a variety of AAC systems. We have students who are using low-tech core word boards, Sign, LAMP Words for Life, Touch Chat, and PRC Accent. And the co-teaching is done with speech and language groups with one other SLP, and the groups include 2 to 3 students, and all of them use some form of AAC. So like I said, I typically co-teach with another SLP during these groups, but we'll discuss other applications of this model as well. Okay, so what exactly is co-teaching? Co-teaching pairs 2 teachers together in the classroom to better support students with a variety of needs. And it's typically for general education and special education teachers, the theory being that it benefits all students, not just those who are receiving special education services. So it creates a more inclusive learning environment. Some researchers outline several benefits to co-teaching. So there are more opportunities for interaction between students and teachers. Double the teachers means that students can learn from more people. Greater opportunities for independence. So students who receive instruction and scaffolding at the level they need helps them be more engaged and independent in their learning. They receive additional support and structure. So even though it might be put in place just, primarily for some students, it can benefit all students. Kind of a universal design for learning approach. And then the teachers are able to support one another. So if teachers are sharing the duties, they have more time to plan and implement the instruction. And they also have more time to spend actually teaching instead of managing behaviors or other things that come up during the session. So I kind of wanted to show you what it looks like for us. The video might be hard to hear on your end, so I'm going to do my best to set it up and narrate it. But this will hopefully just give you a visual of what it looks like. So that's me leading the session. And then there's another SLP, Amelia, who is the non-lead SLP for that day. So she's co-teaching with me. We have 3 students. 2 of them are using LAMP Words for Life on an iPad, and one of them is primarily verbal. One also uses a variety of different signs. So we'll kind of take a look at this, and I'll do my best to narrate what's happening. So that student is requesting for me to sing really fast. We're singing a hello song. And I'm trying to get him to say go. So ready? His sign for go. And we're singing the hello song to him. Amelia is modeling on other students' devices while I'm talking to that student. And she's also taking data. So I'm talking to the student on the end, asking him if he wants us to sing loudly or quietly. And Amelia is helping another student stay engaged and participate while I'm talking to the student on the end. Here she is. The student requested to sing quietly, so Amelia is modeling on the other student's device that we're going to sing here quietly. And we said, ready, set, go. Everyone got a model for it, including the students who weren't participating. So that kind of just gives you a little preview of what it looks like when we are co-teaching. The last time I gave this presentation, I got a lot of questions about IEPs and Medicaid billing. So I wanted to kind of give a brief overview to my answers to those FAQs, and hopefully that'll kind of help you as you think about this. So even though we're both seeing the students every day in a group, we divided the students evenly to be on our caseload. So the SLP who is in charge of each student attends that student's IEP and set meetings. We program their AAC device. and we bill Medicaid for that student. Minutes are written per week, and we don't specify group versus individual therapy in our district. I got a lot of questions about co-teaching with OTs. We used to do it a lot, but we don't regularly do it anymore unless we're doing a special activity or seeing students for an extended period of time, and that's just due to billing reasons. A lot of people were wondering how we got stakeholders on board, so how our bosses are okay with this. Our boss and our lead SLP have both observed us multiple times, and they support what we're doing. So my best advice is to be open to discussions, observations, and sharing your data. We've always been really transparent with our data and showing them what we're doing and how it works, and they're on board with it. So, and then, you know, in the end, every state and district is different. So make sure you're consulting the appropriate authority in yours if you have questions, but hopefully that kind of shows you what it looks like in my district. Okay, so now we'll talk about the different types of co-teaching. The first one is called One Teach, One Observe. So as you can see from the little graphic, there's one teacher at the front of the class instructing, while the other teacher observes the students, taking note of their responses and of any issues that might come up. And just another general note, all of these are kind of set up for the classroom, but I'm doing it, like I said, in a therapy setting. So the observing teacher is not interacting with students. They're just kind of watching and taking note of everything. So we use this model of co-teaching when a student has an issue or a difficulty that we're trying to solve, or when one SLP wants feedback on their therapy. And a lot of times it's really helpful in gauging how effective different cueing methods are. The next type of co-teaching is called One Teach, One Assist. And if you're new to co-teaching, this might be a good place to start. This is actually the model that we use the most often. And we kind of refer to it as having a lead SLP and a para or assistant SLP. So there's one teacher at the very, you know, leading all of the class, and then another teacher is kind of floating around the room, helping out, you know, seeing if students have any questions and keeping their focus on the lesson. Excuse me. Okay. There's also parallel teaching. So in this type of co-teaching, students are divided into groups, and each teacher takes a group and teaches the same content to them. That can allow students more opportunities to respond and more assistance if needed. And we use this model when we have students who are highly distracted by one another and it's just not working when they're together, or when we have a larger group, like if we're trying to make up some minutes. It does allow, like I said, for those opportunities to respond while still having a lot of wait time, which is nice, but it doesn't always work well with managing behaviors and collecting data. So we don't always use this model. The next one's called station teaching. This is when students are divided into groups, but then they're also being taught different content. So similar to parallel teaching, except the teachers are teaching separate content, and then the groups switch and they repeat their instruction. If applicable, one station could include independent work. We don't usually do that. And the model can be helpful in playing off of the strengths of each teacher. So if you were doing this with another SLP, it might look like one SLP reading a book with students, while the other SLP targets more functional communication with play, and then you switch groups. This one we don't really use because we have such small groups. It's called alternative teaching. So one teacher is taking the majority of the class, and the other teacher is focusing on a small group needing additional support. Like I said, we don't currently do it, but I think it would be really good for a special or general education classroom during doing a whole group language lesson. So for example, if you're pushing into a special ed classroom during book reading, you could pull a group of students aside for more heavy-hitting language-based instruction on that same book. Okay. And then the final one is called team teaching. This one's considered the most complex approach. because it involves just really understanding the content, understanding what the other teacher SLP is doing, and being able to deliver instructions in kind of a tag team approach. We often use this model with groups that are super busy or really demanding, or sometimes we just decide to have decreased structure and we're targeting communication more solely through play and trying to help with that carryover. It really requires that you trust the other co-teacher to know when to tag off with you, and that you both stay really flexible and follow each other's lead. One thing that I've learned about co-teaching is that good co-teaching relationships are often compared to good marriages. So you have to be able to read the other person and support what they're doing in the moment. So it's definitely something that takes some time to build up to, but it's a really valuable way to deliver instruction. Okay, so now that we've talked about the different types of co-teaching, I just kind of wanted to get the wheels turning on why you might want to co-teach. So we've all had that person that we love working with. And if you think about the people that you work with every day and what you love about them, imagine who you would choose to co-teach with if you could. So who might be on that special education dream team? What strengths and personality traits might they have? What role might each person play? And what would the benefits be for the students? So to give an example, excuse me, I co-teach once a week with the music therapist, and we use more of a one teach, one assist model, but a parallel or station model could also work. And the benefit for the students is that the students that are in that group love music. They benefit from it. We get more verbal output when they're participating in music, and they don't have to listen to me sing. So it's a really nice thing for them. Another example, when I co-teach with the occupational therapist, we do a lot of whole group crafts and snacks. And it's really nice because they're language-rich activities, but they also require motor skills and increased planning and having all hands on deck. So I couldn't necessarily do that alone. And I can, the students can really benefit from having that additional motor and sensory support from the OT.
Annie, we have a question from Shelby.
Yes.
What is the caseload size within the school for the two SLPs combined?
What the caseload size is for the two SLPs combined? We each had about, I mean, it fluctuated, but between 35 and 40 students. So that includes, I'm kind of going to get into that in this slide, but that includes some essential skills classrooms as well as a general education caseload. All right. So now that, you know, I've kind of talked about why you might want to co-teach, I'll tell you my background a little bit. So I started AAC therapy in the school setting in 2015. We have 2 full-time SLPs at the school, and we serviced 4 essential skills classrooms. So the students were in special education for the majority of the day. We each took the caseloads of the two classrooms at the time, and I tried a lot of different therapy models, and each one just seemed lacking. So, you know, sometimes I would go into the classroom and do a whole group push-in lesson. I tried pulling students out into the speech room. I tried individual sessions, and it was still just really difficult. So we divided the work, but we didn't really conquer. Para-educators were really supportive, but at that time, when I started, the culture of my school did not help the students focus on fostering independence in AAC use. So my coworker and I did different AAC trainings and visuals, but we just didn't quite get the support that we needed. So 2 years ago, we started co-teaching, and it was kind of out of desperation just to see if it would work. And I continue today to co-teach with a variety of educators because I love it so much. I love it because of the following reasons. So it allows for meaningful and thorough data collection. So I used to scramble during progress report time, trying to scrounge up enough data. I was too busy managing behaviors, modeling, and providing instruction to take meaningful data. So having another person in the room taking that data that you need, now progress reports are a breeze, and I know exactly where I'm going with my students. As far as missed sessions, so we all know that SLPs have 1 billion meetings per week, and we have to miss a lot of sessions and try to make them up later. But with this model, if one of us had a meeting or was out sick, the other SLP could still provide therapy. So this school year, we've had an average, well, last school year, I guess, we had an average of 2.8 co-taught sessions per week, which was 1 to 3 sessions per day. From August to May, we only missed 1 of those sessions total because we were able to more easily make up the sessions throughout our day, or one of the SLPs could take over. If I were co-teaching with a non-SLP, I might have had to cancel more sessions than that since no one can take over my job. But I'd encourage you to think about, if you're co-teaching with somebody else who's not an SLP, what would that imply for carryover and meeting goals? What would it imply for a missed session where you're not there, but the student might still be able to communicate with that trained communication partner? As far as behavior management, very little of the therapy session now is lost due to managing behaviors. First of all, because we do what we can to prevent those behaviors, but if they do happen, one SLP can quickly diffuse the situation and the show goes on. For troubleshooting in the moment, if a student comes in with a broken or uncharged device, which happens more often than I would like, the non-lead SLP can get it up and running again while the therapy group continues. So you're not, wasting time without it because it's getting taken care of in the moment. A lot of times if a student is having trouble with a concept or with a therapy approach, we bounce ideas off of each other in the moment and can try new things right away and get feedback from each other. When things go south, it's nice to have someone to laugh about it with. Not every session is perfect still, even with 2 of us, but instead of doing it alone, I get to do it with somebody who's laughing with me and supporting me every step of the way. So it's really nice to have that aspect as well. And then the biggest reason that I co-teach is that students have increased progress and independence. So 100% of our students made progress last quarter. Most of them are carrying their skills over to other settings, and we know that they're progressing because we have that solid data that we took to back it up. So now we'll get more into the nitty-gritty stuff about how we got this co-teaching approach up and running. And I broke it up into 3 components. So we first collaborated to discuss what we wanted and how we were going to get there. And then we calibrated, we got on the same page as each other for different issues that came up. And it's worth noting that we calibrate constantly, not just once. So we have lunch together pretty much every day, and we're always kind of talking about the sessions and what happened and what we could change. And then finally, we implemented our plans, and we take daily data to make sure that our plans are working. So as far as collaborating, my co-SLP and I first identified some key problems that we were having with AAC therapy. So we kind of just had a lack of support or not quite the right support during sessions despite the trainings that we had given. We were having difficulty with behavior management. One big difficulty we had was that groups were too large, or they included students who weren't really a good match for each other because we were separating by classroom and not by skill level. And then data collection was really difficult, like I said. So our initial thought process that kind of got the ball rolling was, wow, wouldn't it be really great if we could kind of be each other's para or support person? Okay. And after we identified the possibility of co-teaching with each other, we realized that collaborating with others, possibilities for collaboration were nearly endless. So other co-teaching opportunities that I've used include the music therapist and the OT, like I mentioned earlier. I do still co-teach with paraprofessionals and graduate student interns. And I'd definitely like to point out, if you don't have a professional that you would like to co-teach with, student interns are a really great option. As a bonus, they're learning this awesome new skill that they can implement once they become an SLP. So our first student intern that we had actually went on to get a job at my school. So she was the second SLP that I started co-teaching with. So it was really great to be able to train her. And then we trained another graduate student intern on it this past semester. Other professionals include special and general education teachers, ABA associates, and parents. So this upcoming school year, I have a plan to collaborate with ABA associates and kind of get them on board with the different skills that we teach. And then often paras are present at the sessions. They're able to observe our co-teaching strategies, and we talk about those strategies with the paras as we're implementing them. So several paras have taken those strategies back to the classroom to encourage generalization of skills. And I think it's really valuable for them to be able to see what we're doing instead of having to be in the moment, you know, hands-on doing it themselves and maybe not being able to fully observe what's going on and why we're doing something. So just some reflection questions for you as we talk about this. What would therapy look like with each co-teaching partner? And again, if going back to your ideal co-teaching partner, what qualities would you look for? And, you know, maybe thinking about somebody that you could implement this with or what you might have to teach them. So just to give an example, I found out at the end of last year that I'll be at a new school this school year, and I likely won't be able to implement co-teaching with another SLP. So I've been spending the summer reflecting on where I'll go with my co-teaching therapy. I might end up co-teaching with a special education teacher or a para, or like I mentioned, hopefully an ABA associate. And I'd have to backtrack a lot and teach them the models of co-teaching that I want to use, how to model language, how to use the prompting hierarchy. Okay. And then as far as calibrating or getting on the same page as each other, we really first started with identifying and solving any barriers that we had to co-teaching. So our first problem was, how on earth will we make this work in our schedules? We all know that SLPs have insane schedules, and it's really difficult, you know, to schedule one SLP, much less two. So our first solution was to pair students that were alike, so students that had similar skill levels or goals, even if they were in different classes or grades. So we had some groups that had a sixth grader and a kindergarten student because they were on similar levels. Then we prioritized scheduling those students first. So those really difficult to schedule groups were given priority, and then all co-taught groups were scheduled before any other students were. So we really gave the AAC groups priority. And then some teachers didn't want to make that switch to us seeing students based on skill level and not by grade level because it required them to be more flexible at first. So we really spent some time explaining our rationale and explaining that we would be able to be more reliable. Like I mentioned, we wouldn't be missing as many therapy sessions. And after that, they were willing to be more flexible with our scheduling, and now they're totally on board. Our next problem, as I mentioned, was a problem with queuing. So just well-meaning staff kind of ready to jump in with cues before we wanted them to. We wanted to figure out how to avoid that pitfall in our own therapy. So we spent a lot of time studying the prompting hierarchy together, and we regularly discuss what each prompt looks like and sounds like. So even in the middle of a session, we'll sometimes say, oh, would you call that an indirect cue or a direct? And just really spend a lot of time getting on the same page about that. Okay, so here's the prompting hierarchy. I'm sure if you've been in AAC for a little bit, you've seen it before, seen something similar before. But for those of you who might be a little bit newer to AAC, it's important to follow the prompting hierarchy specifically for AAC therapy. We have it hung up where we can see it when we're providing therapy, so we're always referencing it. So the first one is a natural or environmental cue. Excuse me, just having, I'm gonna stop for a sip of water. So a natural or environmental cue is just having toys and experiences that the students want to take part in. You always give wait time in between each cue. So we have, a variety of toys that the students enjoy out on the table, and then we wait and see what happens. The next cue would be a gesture or pointing. I might shake the toy a little bit or kind of show the students or look inside and see if that piques their interest. The next is an indirect visual or verbal cue. So that's kind of like a hint. I might just tap on their device or say, oh, it looks kind of like you want something, and see what happens. Then we move on to a direct visual or verbal cue. So we tell them, oh, you could say, I want blah, 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 or you could tell him to stop. We give some wait time. If that's not working, then we'll physically model on their device. And then the last one is a physical prompt, and we should really be avoiding physical prompting at all costs. You can't force a verbal student what to say, so you shouldn't be trying to do that with AAC users either. So we really don't ever go to a physical prompt. Okay, so do you ever co-teach in those specific needs special education classrooms? Yes, I have in the past. I didn't do it as much this past school year, but definitely a lot of times we go into those special education classrooms and co-teach in there. Sometimes the two of us SLPs will go in and do a lot of supporting while the special education teacher is leading a session. How long are your co-teaching sessions? Usually 30 minutes long. Do you have an average or target time length? Again, usually 30 minutes. A lot of our students have 120 minutes a week, so we usually do 4 30-minute sessions, but it depends on the student. Do you ever co-teach within the specific needs special education classrooms using the special educator as your co-teacher? Yeah, like I mentioned, not as much, and I'm working on starting that this upcoming school year, but we have done it in the past. For verbal students, is the direct visual or verbal prompt almost the same as a direct model? A direct visual prompt for a verbal student might look something like what's on this page actually, so like a sentence strip. And I might point to the word that I'm trying to target in that sentence. Or I might point to want, and then they're gonna verbalize want. So I would say it's a little bit different from a direct model in that it's still less of a cue, and I'm not completely, telling them, okay, you could say want. They still kind of have to come up with it on their own. But I would say, it's a fine line, and that's why we're constantly talking about the prompting hierarchy together. And then we have one from PT. I co-teach language and motor groups with an OT and SLP in 3 locations. That sounds awesome. I would love it if the SLPs in other locations would join our sessions. Sometimes they don't join due to schedule, and sometimes because they don't see the benefit. I'm going to try to use that information to convince a few more to join us. Okay, so not really a question, but that's a great comment. Is there carryover in the classroom after co-teaching sessions? We have noticed it's been some slow progress, but we have noticed year to year that there has been more AAC use in the classrooms. I I know that a lot of us SLPs struggle with the same things. So, you know, to be kind of blunt about it, a lot of times we would walk into the classroom and the device would be in the student's backpack, or it hadn't been charged all day or something like that. And now we're getting to the point where the devices are typically on the table in front of the student. And paras are beginning to use the AAC devices more to model and to expect communication from students. So we are seeing carryover. It is a little bit slower, but it is there. And then we have, how is this referred to under related services? Is it considered a group session? So I said at the beginning, my district, personally, we don't do group versus individual sessions. We don't specify that in the IEP. So I can't answer that from my standpoint. I think that would just be something to talk to your special education coordinator about and see what they think about it. How long did it take you guys to build data that supports that this approach works? Not super long. And I'm going to talk about my data system in just a couple slides. So maybe it'll kind of show you why it didn't take that long. But I would say about a quarter was the longest it took to show, hey, we're seeing a lot of really good progress in these students. And the fact that we could show that the students were making progress on their goals every single quarter was very helpful as well. All right, so just another note on prompting. This is just a picture showing use of other tools besides gestures and verbals for prompting. I learned this school year, actually, that you use your finger to model, but you should be using other tools for direct or indirect visual cues, and that way you're not accidentally over prompting. So you could use a stylus, a laser pointer. We made that little nifty highlighter box that's touching more at the top of the screen based on, I think, instructions from Instagram. So somebody had made one with straws and pipe cleaners, and that's a really good tool to use to highlight certain boxes and bring the student's attention to it. We also, for visual cues, we'll use core word boards or sentence strips, like the sentence strips at the bottom were used for a student who is practicing asking questions with his device. Other SLPs in your district utilizing this model in their schools. In my specific district, the school that I was at actually housed almost all of the essential skills classrooms. So we had the majority of the AAC users in the district. So to answer your question, not in my specific district. I did give this at a statewide conference. And the district that I work for is actually spread across multiple different school districts. So it's a county-wide kind of cooperative. And then we have partner districts that we work in. So in my partner district, as far as I know, we're the only 2 SLPs doing this, but there were other SLPs from my county-wide district that were at the presentation I gave a couple months ago. And they indicated that they wanted to try to start using it. So it kind of just, I think, depends on your caseload and you know, your setup, and if you're able to do it and able to kind of make it work for you. So moving on. Our next big question was, who's going to lead each session? So our solution was to use para-educator principles when we were implementing a one teach, one assist model, and we scheduled leader time for each SLP to share for each SLP each day to share the workload. So we each led about 1 to 2 sessions per day. And those para-educator principles are to be a silent support, direct the attention toward the lead SLP, so you're not really distracting, manage behaviors quietly as they come up, and then modeling and providing aided language input on students' devices during the session. Okay. And then we had a big problem with behavior management. It was very difficult. So our solutions that we came up with were to use task boxes with fidgety students. So if it was another student's turn, they might use the task boxes to give them a job when they're waiting their turn or to keep their hands busy. We tried different seating models like vestibular discs, chairs that have really high arm rests to discourage eloping, different foot rests, and then kind of using walls and tables as natural barriers. And we're both really committed to switching roles as needed throughout the session. And that can be a really difficult thing. That's kind of the tag teaming good relationship that we talked about. So we check in with each other on how it's we check in with each other often on how it's going, and we both made a commitment to staying flexible during the session to accommodate for switching to those roles. Someone is asking for a slide with paraprofessional guidelines that I listed. I do not have one, but if you email me at the end, I can definitely send you what I've got. Okay, and then here's some visuals for our behavior management. So that's a visual schedule that we use. That's an example of some task boxes. It doesn't have to be fancy, but students that we work with do love putting those little pom-poms into the bucket or pulling that string, it has knots in it, out of the other bucket. And then visual cue cards that we use all the time. Other ideas include movement breaks are being removed from the group for a moment if things are getting a little too wild, having reinforcement charts and schedules. We oftentimes use different screens or the CoTeaching SLP to help block students from looking at each other or to shift their gaze to the lead SLP. And then for students who need more like kinesthetic and sensory input, we have had them rip paper, or we give them gentle squeezes to help settle them down. We also wanted to make sure that our goals were meaningful. So our solution was to consult various AAC experts and resources, and I have those listed at the end of the presentation and also in a handout for you all. And we developed a goal bank and dedicated materials for functional communicators. So the dedicated materials are in a milk carton, and it's just, or a milk, whatever you call those, bucket. And it's just kind of a grab and go. You know, we'd have all of those materials ready to go for any AAC group. The goal bank is helpful because it helps us be on the same track as far as easily targeting all students' goals in one session. And finally, we started writing goals with a specific cueing level in mind. So instead of saying minimal cues or verbal cues, we were really specific. A lot of our goals are written for indirect cues to help them get more to that independent level. And that helps us know whether or not they're making progress as well. Again, if you're not new to AAC, you may have seen this before. It's the 4 communicative competencies, and several researchers came up with this model for understanding whether a student is using AAC to their fullest potential. So we always align the goals to one of these communicative competencies. And just a note that AAC is really just language therapy. So AAC is the tool that helps students participate fully in therapy, but a lot of our goals and a lot of the activities look like things that we would use for language students. And I just have one sample goal from our goal bank for each competency. So for operational competency, showing that you can use your AAC device. This particular goal was written for a student whose device was often in her backpack or somewhere where she couldn't reach it, and she was in a wheelchair. So, you know, having those self-advocacy skills and being able to request a device and turn it on and off if nobody was going to be around to help her was really important. For linguistic competence, that's, you know, especially where it looks like a typical language goal, like answering WH questions. Social competence, a lot of times we're writing goals for rejecting or protesting to avoid those I want kind of things. And then strategic competence, using those communication repair strategies. So we use that a lot of times with more verbal students who use AAC to augment. Okay. And then collecting meaningful data was really difficult, as I mentioned. So our solution was to assign a dedicated data collector, create data collection sheets specific to each group, and include the prompting hierarchy on the data sheets. So usually the non-lead co-teacher takes the data, although sometimes it's the other way around, especially when we have a student who's really behavioral or we're co-treating with somebody who's not as familiar with the data sheets. Here's an example of one of those data sheets. So it's written specifically for one of our groups. It has the goal and the target queuing level on it. And then down the side, it has the queuing hierarchy. And I'll show you a completed one in just a moment. There's another. Okay, so this is what it looks like when it's complete. I'll get my laser pointer so I can really show you. So for this J student, he had 30 observed opportunities for functional communication. So it's almost kind of a ratio. We put a plus if he did it independently, a plus if he did it with indirect cues, etc. His goal is written for indirect cues. So when we're kind of converting that data into our billing system, we're looking at, okay, how many times did he do it independently or with indirect cues versus how many opportunities total did he have? So he that day received 25 out of 30 points or 83% accuracy. So it can be converted into a percentage, but it also gives a really good look at what they're able to do with different supports and kind of where to go from there. Okay, and then like I mentioned, our go-to materials, these are some of our go-tos. We also use books that emphasize core words and vocabulary, adapted or interactive books, sensory bins, clear closed containers to help students ask for help. If you have any go-to favorites, please email them to me because I love finding new materials. At the last presentation I gave on this, somebody said that they use snow globes a lot, which I think is genius. So if you have any hacks like that, let me know. Okay, and then our final kind of calibrating question was, how can we extend this to other professionals? Because that's really where we would like to take this next. Our solution was to strategically choose which paraeducators are present to observe. We chose ones that, you know, we knew were already kind of open to it and were ready and willing to learn. And then we kind of talk them through what we're doing as we go about therapy. We presented on AAC to a group of district OTs, and after we presented to them last year, many reported that they are now using the students' AAC devices and low-tech boards in occupational therapy. So we're starting to get some more buy-in from other professionals as well. And then troubleshooting with special education teachers to find AAC solutions for the classroom. So those teachers have more buy-in when we're actively working with them to find solutions to behavior and academic problems in the classroom. And we have more time to do that because we're working as a team. So we might go into a classroom to get a group of students and the teacher approaches us with an issue. One of us can take the students and go do therapy while the other one kind of talks the teacher through that issue or helps them find a solution to the problem. So that's been really helpful in getting them on board with AAC as well. Okay, and then as far as implementing, I have some videos to show. Whoopsie, I know the sound isn't working super well and we're kind of short on time, so I'm going to choose one of them to show and I'll again narrate it and hopefully it'll give you a good sense of what co-teaching is like. So we'll try this one. This is a group of 3 students. 2 of them are using AAC apps on an iPad to communicate. One of them is mostly verbal and uses a lot of low-tech visuals. And the student in the middle that I'm talking with uses a lot of adapted sign as well. My fabulous co-SLP, Amelia, is helping with this session. She's the para-SLP, so she's going to be taking data and helping the students stay focused and modeling on their devices. So I'm asking the student what we should play. And we have a spinning toy and a dino puppet. Now we're trying to elicit him signing or saying, I want. So we're giving kind of an indirect cue. And a model of one, and he did it. Amelia was able to tell me he was doing it under the table. I'm asking the student what the dino should do. And he likes it when the dino kisses him, and that's his sign for eat. So he's signing eat. And I modeled stop. This student clearly wants something, so I'm asking him what the dino should do. And he said he wanted to hear the dino, so I made him talk in a funny voice. While that was happening, Amelia was modeling on another student's device, helping keep his focus on what was happening. And now she is blocking him from looking at another student. So one of his favorite things is to look at another student and laugh. And Amelia's kind of blocking that from happening. We're giving some gentle squeezes to help get him settled. And Amelia models eat, so the puppet is eating her. So that's another really good way to use a co-teacher is as a model of, you know, what you could say and what might happen if you say something. Okay. So I know we're about out of time. I know this exact model of co-teaching might not be possible in your setting, but like I said, there's implications for applying these principles to other situations. So if you think about the question I asked at the beginning, what would you be able to accomplish in speech and language therapy that's difficult to accomplish on your own? You can kind of think about the different steps that I laid out collaborating. Okay, who would you pair up with and how would you get them on board? Different considerations for calibrating or getting on the same page. You might want to think about scheduling, the prompting hierarchy, data collection, the different co-teaching models, and what training might be necessary for non-SLPs, and then implementing. So thinking about what a session would look and sound like in your ideal world, and what models you would select for the specific students on your caseload. Just some shout outs to my fabulous co-SLPs, Lindsay Parker Klimple and Amelia Martin. I couldn't have done it without them, and they're amazing. Julie and Yabane is a wonderful pair that we work with. Janice Albers, the music therapist, and Tara Reiner, the OT that I co-treat with, and my students' families who allowed their students to be featured in this presentation. This is a handout for you guys up on the website, but it's some of my very favorite AAC resources, especially ones that I used when I was first starting out with AAC. Some references if you want to look into co-teaching further. And my contact information if you have questions that you think of. But does anyone have any questions right now? A comment. One benefit that I see with this method is that it could model more ideal para-prompting support methods can look like. Have you noticed this has helped with overall para supports? 100% yes. I think it's very helpful instead of, you know, I'm teaching and it's hard to stop and say, oh, hey, can you like back off the prompting or can you try this instead? It's much more helpful for somebody to be able to observe that. So that is an end goal, is to help them observe it, teach them explicitly about it, and then start co-teaching with paras. Okay, and oh, you mentioned billing at the start. Can you say again how you and your co-SLPs bill? Sure. So every district is different, but we use an online system for Medicaid billing, and we're required to put all of our data into that. So we split up the students. I have, say we have 10 students. I would take 5, the other SLP takes 5, and we are the ones in charge of billing for those students that are like technically, on our caseload, even though we're both seeing the students. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming to this presentation. I hope you found it helpful. I hope it makes you excited to try out some of these different strategies in your own setting.
And Annie, thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.